Mhm. And we are live. Yep. We are live now. So, ladies, thank you for being here today. Welcome to this, I think it's the 21st World Mime Chat. So we've been doing this for 21 weeks now on every Saturday. We maybe missed 1 or 2 Saturdays. So we hope that our viewers will forgive us. So we are live on Facebook. And again, thank you very much for joining us. And Sharon, thank you so much for organizing this. And I hope you will enjoy yourselves. And I'm sure that our viewers, just like me, will enjoy the chat that we will have. So welcome again, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Marco. Again, thank you for establishing the Mime World Organization. I, along with 4 other women, and I have organized this larger group of women, these 2 panels of specifically USA Women in Mime. The panel last week was Karen Hoyer, Joan Merwin, Karen Montanaro, Catherine Gasta, and oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the 5th person, but those 4 women and I organized this event, and it's been just a real joy to think about putting people together in this, to discuss this art form that I've loved all my adult life and beyond, from childhood on, especially in this period of very torturous political divisiveness in the US in the past several months. So to be able to really use this time in organizing these events to reflect on this art form and take a break from the other cacophony has been wonderful for me. It's actually been a real solace. So thank you, Marco, for your overall organizational intention in bringing us all together. And I also want to thank James Donlan. He's a wonderful mime in the US, and he's probably watching now too. And he was really the catalyst to start these specific Women in Mime in the US panels. So thank you to James.
Well, actually, James was reached out like a month and a half or 2 months ago. He saw one of our chats and he asked me if we would be interested in doing a chat about mimes in general in the United States. And well, of course, I was really happy about it because, you know, I mean, with the technology and everything, people from different continents, they start knowing about each other. And our community, mime community, is not such a big community, but it is specific. So so that's how we started. So James was actually in the roots of these US chats.
Absolutely. You know, the world needs catalysts, people who can have an idea and actually make it happen and trust that other people are going to run with the idea. And I think that was the idea here. He certainly was the catalyst for all of these. So what we're going to do today, similar to last week's forum, we're going to divide into a few sections. We will start by introducing ourselves. Before we even do that, though, I just want everyone to see the faces and the names of the people on our panel. So I want to introduce Jean Barber, who is the director of the American Mime Theater. And she's in New York City. Yep. And there you go. And we have Sara June, who is a Bouto artist, and she lives in Boston, Massachusetts. And we have Joan Schirle, who is the director of the Del Arte International company up in Blue Lake, California, although currently she is in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So I'm very jealous about that. And then we have Liz Bolick, who is a mime, clown, variety performer. She has her own company as well. And she is, whoops, There's a phone in the background. And she is based in Greenwich, Connecticut. Sorry about the phone in the background, everybody. It'll go away. So what I would like to do, please stop ringing phone. What I would like to do before we each have the floor for a longer period of time, I want to read a quote from our second president of the United States, John Adams, one of our founding fathers here in the US. And I thought this quote was very appropriate because, again, with the political torture that we've all been through, it's kind of nice to realize that way back when our country was founded, the idea of arts education was a very important idea, especially to John Adams. And we are all performers, but I believe we all teach. And I think most of us who perform mime also teach or have taught at some point or another. We know the importance of arts education. This is what John Adams said over 200 years ago. I must study politics and war that our sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. Our sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy in order to give their children the right to study painting, poetry, music, and architecture. Now, even though he left the word mime out, I will forgive him for that. But the point is made. He saw that the arts were at the peak of the educational hierarchy, the highest thing to attain in one's education. And that's pretty remarkable. And, you know, have we gotten there? I'm not quite sure. But during this shutdown period, you know, people will always create, the arts will always survive, but you know, to be able to teach young people a specific discipline, a very complex discipline, not just, you know, here, create some art out of thin air, but the discipline of an art form is just a wonderful gift as a teacher to give to young people. And anyway, we'll get more into what each of us does because I'm heavily in arts education. So I'll talk more about that when I have my piece. But right now, I want to ask each participant to give us a sense of the arc of your career. So your earliest inspirations, your current inspirations, but really what drew you into this, to study this incredible art, and how you've used it throughout your life as a creative artist. So I am going to hand it over to Joan to kick it off, and just tell us about your life, Joan.
There's a bit of construction noise in the background, so if it becomes too much, please tell me. They endlessly construct here. Let's see, I was trying to condense over 50 years of a career into a short form. I'll do my best. When I was about 8 years old, my mother enrolled us in ballet classes. So dance was my first inspiration to be a mover. And when I got to high school, I think I was in my first play. And by the time I got to college, I was convinced to switch my major to drama, and I became in love with the theater and was in every play that could possibly be done at that time. Is that annoying? Because it's slightly annoying to me. I can shut the window if it's too much. Okay. When I finished college, University of Santa Clara, because I was both a dancer and an actor, one of my professors knew that I was going to New York City and said, you should study mime. And just before that, I had gone to see a performance of Marcel Marceau, probably 64, 65. He came to San Francisco, and my boyfriend at the time and I were so unbelievably taken that the only time in my life I went backstage and said, please, may I have your autograph? And I think both of us still have our programs from that performance of Marceau. And that was my first experience of seeing that kind of mime. So when I went to New York City, the first thing I did was look up mime in the phone book, and I came across the American Mime School and enrolled in classes with Paul Curtis. And I think you're still in the same location, which is pretty amazing. So I took classes there. I happened to have been pregnant at the time, so there was a kind of natural several-month end to that. But that's where I first learned a particular vocabulary, a way of speaking about the body and a relationship to a teacher. And I shouldn't be the person to comment on that, but it was particular, a way of dealing with students. And after that, I studied with Tony Montanaro at the Herbert Berghoff studio. This is before Tony moved to Maine. And very different form of teaching, way of teaching. And I remember things like him saying, be a rock hurtling through space. Now, that is a tremendously challenging direction to a student, and one of those that I think forces you to grapple with what does it mean to embody something moving that doesn't have limbs. And anyway, all of this was tremendously informative to me. At the same time, I was taking lessons in the FM Alexander technique, which I eventually became certified to be a teacher of, and found that two studies incredibly useful in learning to do subtle isolations and so on, and how you keep your body free and flexible in doing something as demanding as some of the mime forms. Cut to later, when I met Carlo Matzoni Clementi in the mid-70s in Northern California, and his wife, Jane Hill, and they were about to start what they were calling the Dell'Arte School of Mime and Comedy. And that was in 1976. And I met them because I auditioned for their summer festival, but they were about to open their school, and they saw my training and my Alexander work and invited me to join the faculty. So I did. And that, of course, changed my life. And I have not been out of touch with that spirit since. Along the way, Carlo's masters were Marceau and Barber and Lecoq. So our school has always had a strong Lecoq basis to the training, which has been shaped by others. But Carlo himself was a wonderful mime. His own mime performing career was shortened by an accident of jumping through a stage and ruining his knees and blah, blah. Along the way, I met people like Mamiko Yonayama, who knew Carlo, who came to visit the school. We had guest artists come and teach, like Lenny Pitt, like Jeff Hoyle. And I met Jill Houston, who I contacted to ask her about her history. I don't know if any of you know Jill. She worked with James Donlan and Bob Francisconi in a couple of troupes. And I had, a wonderful quote from her about what it was like to be a woman in mime when everyone thought mime was only for white guys. And she was with another woman named Pat Winkelmann, who I never met, but Jill spoke about her as important. So time went on, and my performance as a mime artist, I would say, evolved into a performance as a movement theater artist. And in about 1987, maybe, we changed the name of the school, partly because mime had become associated in the United States with whiteface pantomime pretty much only. And we are a school of theater, a school of training actors, and a school of devising. So Carlo objected strongly to the change in the name. He was passionate about mime, the importance of mime to all theater, to all movement, to life, basically.
Mhm.
And he even started something he called the Mimological Institute, to talk, to move, etc., during his years of being alive. But we felt that the students who we wanted to attract were very limited by the title School of Mime and Comedy. And then another number of years after that, we changed the name to the International School of Physical Theater. So since then, sorry, I just lost my screen. Hang on, I'll find you. There you are. Because we're a company and a school, our work ranges very widely through the world of mime, mask, movement, devising, playwriting. There is not a particular box into which we can be confined, other than to say the strongest influence is the Lecoq basis, but with these others. And right now, our mime teacher is an Ecuadorian man, clown, mime named Carlos Gallegos, who came to us 2 years ago. And I think that probably kind of wraps up history. For a while, I was on the board of the International Mimes and Pantomimes. That was, I think, in the 80s. And that was when Paul Curtis was alive, and really enjoyed that connection. And I think maybe Barry Rolfe, who I saw has at least been acknowledged and mentioned on the Facebook page. But I think also of Julie Goel. I think of Jill Houston and Lorraine Yarnell. I think of Lucille Ball. I think of these women as really important to the work of mimes. Carlo always emphasized in our curriculum the importance of watching silent film mime work. Let's see, I think that's the only thing. Just I will probably get into it about the role of women specifically in mime, which has been a narrower one than the world of men in mime. And I'm going to two quotes, one from Jill Houston, who worked with James Donlan, as I said, Charlie Oates, Bob Morse, a few other people. She says, Pat Winkelmann and I both experienced sexism in the field. Before we met, I can remember a time when some male, usually old school European or Eastern European mime teachers, either wouldn't accept women as students, or at least wouldn't take them seriously because, quote, females can't be neutral. Or so I heard from other female mime students in the Bay Area in the 70s. Apparently, male and neutral were synonymous in those days. While Pat and I were touring with James Donlan's Menagerie Mime Theater, Pat was asked if she wasn't too tall to be a mime. Charlie Oates was 6'2" and never got asked that question. At 5'9", I was the shortest member of that company. James and Chris fell somewhere in between. And while back east, I received a call to Plexus, that was their company, requesting a mime for a commercial photo shoot. I said I was available, but no, that wasn't acceptable. Either of my male colleagues would be preferable, as apparently mimes were male to the commercial world as well. And the only other quote I want to say is this extraordinarily heartbreaking quote from Mamako, who had an incredibly rough time in her own country, being a woman mime. A woman of talent sharpens a knife to stab her own heart.
Mm.
So that was her experience of being a woman of talent. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Joan. That was fascinating. Just really, really interesting. And, you know, there's so many tangents we could go out on. I'm going to turn it over to Sara to speak about your life as a Bouto artist.
Okay. So maybe a somewhat different trajectory for me. And thank you again for inviting me to be part of this. And I'm really grateful to hear these stories and these histories and meet all of you. So I'm a Bouto artist, and I'm not sure how well acquainted people are with Bouto here. So I'll just give a brief little history of Bouto. So Bouto is a Japanese sort of post-World War II movement form that can also be considered a form, a sort of a related form like Mime. It's a physical theater form. And it was founded by two men who did some work together in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Hijikata Tatsumi and Ono Kazuo, both Japanese men who, I mean, there's a lot of differing opinion about the origins of Bouto, but I think people can agree that it was an iconoclastic sort of rebellious form of movement that was in reaction to, at least partially in reaction to, Western colonial influences in art in Japan that started pouring in after the war. And it was in some ways an attempt to take back the inherently and also indigenous Japanese body. And they called it sometimes referred to as the natural body or the body that has ancestry. And this is where you kind of see the East Asian influences that are really kind of central to the Bouto form, which is this idea that our bodies carry the history of all of our ancestors and carry the history of all life forms, dating back to the first life form crawling or swimming around in the ocean. And there's a way in which we contain all of that imagery and we contain all of that life. And so that's sort of the central operating principle of Bouto, which I think mimes can, more traditional mime training, as Joan just described, can relate to, which is this idea of the sort of opening to everything coming in, and how do we give voice to those images. So I discovered mime, it was Bouto really, when I had just graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, where I was a painting major. I had been moving my entire life up until then, done a lot of performance, a lot of drama, a lot of sort of more traditional Western dance forms like modern dance. And I was in art school and making paintings and feeling very disconnected from, I felt like it was a very internal kind of world, yourself in this canvas. And I was looking for a way to connect, but I was very dissatisfied with the traditional Western dance forms, which were very codified, it felt like to me. And I saw a Bouto performance in an underground show in Boston. The name of the performer was Jennifer Hicks, and she had just returned from a Bouto workshop in New York City. I can't remember with whom. And she executed this sort of backbending form over a very long period. It felt like it took her 20 minutes to move from the standing position, arcing back to this kind of like nautilus shape. And it was just, I was crying watching it. And I thought, that's what I want to do. it just sort of struck me, and that's what I wanted to. I didn't even know what it was, really. I knew the name of it afterward. I spoke with her. So she started training. She did these trainings, and I would take these trainings with her. And I was training with her weekly, doing private lessons, because I didn't know where else to find Bouto. And I worked with her and danced with her for a couple of years. And this was in 1999, so about 21 years ago. And the first Japanese teacher I had was Kan Katsura, who was a second generation Bouto dancer. And we talk about generations in Bouto. So Hijikata and Ono were obviously the first generation, and they're dancers. And then there was second generation, mostly Japanese dancers. And both of these generations include women, but the women were always subordinate, usually dancers for the men. And their voices were not, they were not singular. It wasn't until this company called Hakutobo in Japan, the first all-female movement troupe, I believe 1980s is when they were performing, that the female voice in Bouto became sort of separated out as like a singular voice. And in the Japanese culture, the male, which was a sort of a patriarchal kind of male focused culture, it played out in the Bouto world as well. And so there's been increasingly over the years, more and more speaking out against that, because there was some abusive stuff going on. And you all may know that the history of Bouto includes significant physical sort of tests and training that can border on painful and sometimes abusive practices in the past. People sleep, I mean, it was a lot of farm work and a lot of hard physical labor to try to break the body down. So there's a whole lineage of Bouto that has to do with almost trying to become broken. And that sort of wove in with what I'm talking about, but I won't go off on that tangent too much. I think it's important to be aware of and not gloss over. So I did this couple of years with Jennifer Hicks, and then I trained and performed with Katsura Kan in 2002. I was attending workshops in different parts of the country. There was a San Francisco Bouto Festival, New York Bouto festivals, and then I joined a troupe with a woman, Deborah Kitsune Butler, and she formed the Kitsune Bouto troupe in Boston. I was a member of for 4 years, and we performed mostly outdoors in sites using the natural world as our stage. So mostly that. We did some stage work, some proscenium work. And then I was in graduate school at the time. I ended up moving to New York City, and I joined the Vangeline Theater. And the Vangeline Theater is an all-female Bouto troupe, as was Kitsune Bouto. So actually, most of my Bouto work has been with women, which is kind of interesting. I've danced less with men, except as instructors. So I was in the Vangeline Theater for 2 years, and she has now gone and formed an institute called the New York Bouto Institute, and they run an annual Bouto festival in New York City. I moved back to Boston because of my husband, basically. So I ended up coming back here. And once I came back here, that was in 2008. So I had been practicing Bouto for about 9 years. There were no Bouto people left in Boston. And I felt very lonely. So I did some solo work for a while. And my husband and I, he's a musician. We do a lot of collaborative work together, but it was a lot of solo movement work. And I was performing a lot, but I was solo. I wasn't part of a troupe at that point. And I joined the Mobius Artist Group, which is a group of experimental artists that's been around since 1977, founded by Marilyn Arsom, who's a performance artist. I'm still a member. And that was my vehicle for doing most of my performance work, was through Mobius, through the space that we had in Boston. And I've done many performances, but probably the most memorable recently was a piece I did. I was invited to do at Boston University in their art galleries for a traveling exhibition of the Hiroshima panels, which are these beautiful paintings by Iri and Toshi Maruki, painted after their experiences of being in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, following the bombings. And the paintings themselves are quite overwhelming to view. They're beautiful and quite intense. And they travel around the world. They have their own gallery in, I think it's in Nagasaki, and they occasionally send them around the world. And Boston University was one of their stops on that year, a few years back. I think it was 2015. And Max, my husband, and I were invited to perform in the gallery with the panels. And so I did a piece, choreographed a piece around the images of the bodies being burned into shadow, which was an intense piece. And Max did some percussion work, some live percussion work with that. And another piece that I did recently that was really amazing was there's an artist. It's so funny when I go to talk about these artists that their names go flooding out of my head, which is why I have it written down. This is a contemporary Japanese artist who makes these fog installations. They're called Fog and Flow, and the fog installations are, they're all throughout the world. And in this particular, let me see if I can find, Fujiko Nakaya is her name. And she makes these beautiful fog installations. And we were invited to do a live movement piece within the fog. And the fog was situated in Frederick Law Olmsted's parks that are all throughout Boston. It's called the Emerald Necklace that he designed. So I have a piece, I did a live movement piece. It was about an hour long. And people carried these little hand speakers and moved with the performance as it wove in and out of the fog and out of the landscape. So those are two that I'm particularly proud of, and also so honored to be invited to be a part of, and especially given the Japanese heritage of the artists themselves who'd made the original movement, the original visual artwork. And so just to jump back really quickly to the work besides that, which is my teaching work. So I started teaching a weekly Bouto class in Boston many years ago. It probably was maybe 2011, 2012 that I started weekly public open classes, just teaching Bouto methodology, movement practice, the discipline of Bouto, the discipline of Bouto Fu, which is the choreographic process with image work based on images in the body. And right now I'm teaching it on Zoom, which is a pale comparison experience, but my effort to keep the community together, and it feels like I have to do it because otherwise, you know, it will disperse, and I don't know how else to do it. I'm very curious to hear what everyone else is doing with their teaching, if you're having a similar experience. So, and then I started a Bouto festival, an international Bouto festival a few years ago. We had a woman from Berlin, a Japanese woman from Berlin, Yuko Kaseki, and a body weather artist who trained and performed with Min Tanaka in Japan, named Zach Fuller. And then we were about to have our second annual international in April, and it was canceled. It was to be at the Boston Center for the Arts, and it featured Yumiko Yoshioka from Japan. It was an all-female group of artists, some amazing women, and then Mary Osanai she's from northern Japan. So it was disappointing to have to cancel that. I still have a theater space rented for whenever this is all over. I got grants. I did the whole 9 yards. So we'll see. And that's about it. I hope I didn't talk for too long. I was sort of rambling on there.
Oh, no, please. That was fascinating. Sarah, such an interesting story. And thank you for the lesson on Bouto, and I want to take your class.
Oh, great. Absolutely.
After the pandemic is over, go to Boston.
Definitely better in person than in the Zoom.
But I might check it out on Zoom. I might just do that. Thank you. And I just want to say you have some just beautiful video up on your
oh, thank you.
So,
yeah, it would be great to exchange. Well, actually, I guess we all have each other's information.
Right. Marco put lots of links of all of the people on the panel. So you can go to the Facebook page and see links. But really beautiful work. I also, before I forget, I had forgotten the fifth person on last week's panel, and it was the marvelous Marguerite Matthews, who runs the Pontine Theater up in New Hampshire. She was marvelous on last week's panel too, just some really great, rich history. But on the subject of videos, before I pass it to our next person to speak, I also want to say Joan has the most fabulous video that she put up that you just created. It's called, correct me if I'm wrong, Joan, June 1st, 2020. And it is a mask character piece. You have to see it. It's just brilliant. It's funny and incredibly moving at the same time.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, definitely check that out. So now I'm going to pass the baton to the marvelous, wonderful Jean Barber, director of the American Mime Theater. I have to say, Jean, you're one of my mentors. So take it away, Jean.
That's a little scary. I'm afraid now. Oh, gosh, Sharon, thank you so much. Isn't Zoom wonderful? I mean, we can come together. It seems like you're neighbors, like you're just down the hall, and we've all been invited for tea and a little chat. And you're not there. You're way over someplace. So Zoom is really wonderful. And Joan, that was wonderful to hear. I didn't know that much about you. We kind of stayed in touch in a way, you know, but not. But now there's Zoom. It's a different thing. So where do I find this on YouTube? This video, where do I find it?
Yeah.
The video.
Joan, if you go to Joan's website, find that video.
Well, no, you go to
okay.
the Vimeo link that's there.
We have links on Facebook, Jean, so you can find links next to all of our names, and you'd find Joan's video there.
Oh, well, I want to thank you for this invitation, and you must know that I'm here to listen, I'm here to learn, and I'm here to share. And what I've been involved with for so many years is something, only one kind of mime, and there are many kinds. So I have to say my name. My name is Jean Callovini Barbour. I'm a performer, and I'm here to perform for you. Now, I've just given you a gift. That's a class procedure, one of them, for freedom. Because to be a performer, you have to have freedom. Because importance to us is a connection with the audience. And if you can't find that connection in yourself, you'll not make it with an audience. You have to know that I'm an actress and that my story is about a journey, how to live a creative life. I came to the American Mime Theater in 1965 as a student, as an actress who wanted to improve my skills of movement. I had no intention to be a mime. Now it's over 50 years that I've been at the American Mime Theater. And people ask me, didn't you have any other place to go? Yeah, I could have gone someplace. But that's the story of like, why did I stay so long? They couldn't get rid of me. I don't know. But to know me, why I stayed, and what I do here as currently the director and the teacher of this art form called American Mime, you have to know something about Paul Curtis, because he created American Mime. I didn't. I'm the keeper of the flame. That's what they call it, keeper of the flame. I keep it going since he died 8 years ago, right? You have to know that Paul spent 60 years of his life. This was his passion. He started out to be a director in the theater and was trained by Erwin Prescotta of the Dramatic Workshop for Social Research in New York City. Now, as a young man, he couldn't get a job as a director. So he went to Paris, did some acting with an American theater. 1948, can you imagine what Paris was like at that time? So full, so rich of cultural things to see and do. And he saw the Peking Opera there, and he saw the work of Decroux, and what he was impressed with Decroux was silence, how well that was done. He comes back to New York. He still can't get a job as a director, but he wants to create some kind of a theatrical experience. He has no intention of beginning a mime company at all. But he also realized that the form of mime that he saw in Paris was not what the American actor needed. So he brings together 5 actors and 5 dancers, and they begin to work on this project. And they create a repertory in 1 year and perform it at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. So what they had done was created something as an art form that blended together the arts of acting and movement motivated from your own feelings in a high degree of form. And so when the year was over, they said, well, we want to continue. Continue, Paul always said, continue. And they did. But there are many companies that have gone in 60 years who've been a part of the evolution of this art form. Now, how do we get that name, American Mime? We're Americans doing mime. The American Ballet Theater is an American company doing ballet. No. Paul had met Jean-Louis Barrault in Paris. And when Barrault came to New York City to perform, he invited Barrault to the studio to see this first company. And he said, what do you call this? And Paul said, I call it mime. He said, no, it's not French pantomime, it's not French. He said, then Paul said, what would you call it? And he said, I'd call it American Mime. So we're stuck with that. And when you talk about the same thing that Johnny said, in the 70s, when people would come to Paul and says, you should change your name, you shouldn't call it mime. You know, no, he wouldn't do that because he had that respect for that art form. And he wasn't about to change it. So think you have to know, maybe I'll flash back. Picture this, an 8-year-old in the backyard writing plays and making my friends be in them. And I said to Helen, you have to be the mother, and you have to have gray hair. So I got my mother's powder box and sprinkled it all over Helen's hair. I have no idea what her mother said when she came home with that, but anyway. And then they put a curtain up in the back porch that would be my stage. And I would come out singing, Give My Regards to Broadway. So acting has always been what I wanted to pursue. You go and in the schools and they put you in the plays and, you know, then you kind of grow up, and Washington, D.C. is my home. And we had a lot of community theater. So I had many opportunities to perform and learn the process of acting. And what we all do is like read every book that we can get and read all the autobiographies and biographies. In 1958, to attend the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Now you got to remember, growing up, I never heard the word mime. I never saw any mime performances. It wasn't until I came to study at the American Mime Theater, we had a class called American Mime, taught by Paul. And that was the first time I heard that. And so that was nice. I didn't think about being a mime. It was a great class. Everybody liked it. We learned a lot from Paul about it. But then a few years of, you know, doing the off-Broadway thing and everything. When I graduated in 1960, and I was honored by the Jellinger Award for the Best Actress of my class, which was very humbling to me. But a friend of mine said, why don't you come down to the American Mime Theater? Paul has a school. We both studied at the Academy at one time. And you need some work on your movement. Why don't you do that? So I did. But I still didn't think I wanted to be a mime. But what I saw, and I became a company member and I performed with the company, was in me. And that every part of my being here led me to have that creative life that I wanted. Now, you can call me a mime if you want to, if the definition of that is a non-speaking actor. You can call me an American mime because that is the art form that I am involved in. So that's my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for telling your story, Jean. That was very moving. And we all know that to be a great mime is to be a great actor. And Jean is a brilliant actor. I learned so much watching Jean taking class at the American Mime Theater. What she could convey with so little movement, with a shift of the eye, with a turn of the head, with a gesture, it was just something to behold. So thank you very much for that, Jean. And now I'm going to turn it over to the marvelous Liz Bolick. Let's hear your story, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm really humbled and honored to be here and to be in this with this magnificent group of women. The talent on the screen, it's phenomenal. And thank you, Marco and Sharon, for setting this up. you know, I had a little bit of a different trajectory,
Mhm.
but a lot of similar, I think, artistic. My heart, I think, is in the same place. Um, you know, as a child, I studied every kind of theater that there was. I took classes. I had very supportive parents. I was also very athletic. I was a swimmer. I was a tennis player. So I was a very physically active human. But I really wanted to grow up to be a classical actress. You know, that was my goal. So we had a beautiful theater in town, McCarter Theater in Princeton, and so many great actors came through there. Many Broadway shows opened there. So even in my very young ages, my parents would take me to the theater. I saw Marcel Marceau at that theater, and it sort of just blew my mind of the possibilities. I just came out kind of weeping. I had never imagined or seen mime before. I mean, I had loved Lucille Ball and Red Skelton and watched, you know, Laurel and Hardy. And I was influenced a lot, I think, as a child growing up by television actors and comedy. So I love physical comedy and I loved comedy in general. I used to be able to do all of Flip Wilson's routines, verbal, like, you know, crazy, weird influences. The Carol Burnett show, you know. I so admired and respected those women, but I was going to be a serious actress. So anyway, so then I graduated high school in 3 years and went to McCarter Theater and just begged and pleaded to do anything for them. I said I would scrub the floors. I wanted to be part of this theater. So they put me in the scene shop to be an assistant scenic painter. And all of a sudden I'm an artist. I was working with these incredible artists and I learned to paint marble and brick and I was designing just as an assistant. And that was fascinating. So then I started painting. Then I got put into the costume department. So then I was backstage with all these people doing costume work and I had learned to sew. So then I learned all this costume design and I was doing a lot of laundry and kind of scrub work, but I was so happy. I would just sit off stage like this. And I was 17, just watching the actors. And then for some reason, they hired me as an understudy. They found out I'd done a lot of community theater. I'd done a lot of small parts in acting. And I got to go on a world tour as an understudy with Vincent Price and Roddy McDowall for a Broadway show called Charlie's Aunt. So I toured for an entire year. I never got to go on stage, but I got to watch Vincent Price, Roddy McDowall, and doing physical comedic theater. And I was with them. I even went to Niagara Falls with Vincent Price on the Maid of the Mist. I mean, I was very young. It was crazy. So I was exposed very young to a lot of really brilliant people. Then I decided to study. So I went to the University of the North Carolina School of the Arts. And who did I meet? I was a freshman, as James Donlan was a freshman teacher there. So as I'm studying my classical theater, I was so drawn to his work. I saw his show, and again, it blew my mind. I studied, we had boot camp with him. I was the thinnest and the best shape I've ever been. I mean, it was hours and hours a day of very serious mime technique, clowning, physical comedy, mask work, a lot of mask work. And I just fell in love. Suddenly, I realized somewhere in my soul that as the spoken word just didn't speak, I just wasn't as good an actress as I was a physical comedian. Somehow I felt more free when I didn't have to talk. Like suddenly this timing grew within me in the sense of, and I think there's something about being a mime that's sort of empathic. I believe that there's a lot of things that you have to feel from the audience. I love that relationships and the fact that there was almost more involved in the silence than in those moments. Anyway, James was an extraordinary teacher. He changed my life. Also, Bob Francisconi was there. So we did Commedia dell'arte. And on top of this, we're still doing all the acting, you know, Shakespeare and learning all this. But one of the most amazing things that happened to me, and someone, I think it was Sarah, or no, maybe Sharon mentioned Pat Winkelmann. So Pat Winkelmann was also there. She was teaching at the School of the Arts the modern dancers mime technique. Okay, so she put together a troupe that included myself, Karen Hoyer, who was in my class, Pat Land, who became Pat Land, Pat Winkelmann married Mark Land, and a group of modern dancers. And it was some of the most extraordinary work I think I ever did. I learned how to collaborate. It was 8 women in a studio, just creating original work. We'd get it from tubes. I mean, I think at that time I'd also seen Mummenschanz. So of course I had a lot of influence by Mummenschanz in that whole physical world with the props. But we started doing shows, original work in college at museums and in libraries and in parks. We toured the parks in the summer. And that was, sometimes it was white-faced mime, but a lot of the work was no makeup at all. So it was a really fascinating time to be part of this school. And I miss Pat Lynn. She passed away a few years ago, but we stayed very good friends. And she was like taller than me. I'm 6 feet. Pat was like 6'2", and then Karen Hoyer was tiny. So the 3 of us did a lot of work together. Physical shapes were just marvelous. And they were, to this day, my favorite partners I think I've ever had. Anyway, so I graduated, moved on, moved to New York City because I was a Jersey girl. So I went back home, moved to Manhattan. And at that time, I still was trying to be an actress. I auditioned as an equity actress. I'd go to these auditions. There'd be hundreds of women, hundreds. I was too tall. I was too short. I was too fat. I was too this. I mean, didn't matter. And then one day I looked into Showbiz magazine and there was this little note that said actress who juggles as an audition. Now at School of the Arts, I had picked up juggling from James. And that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I became a fairly good juggler, especially because we're talking about women. There were very few women at that time in New York City or in the world that I knew that were jugglers. And if I could have been the only female Karamazov sister, I would have been. I mean, I was a partner juggler. I became quite efficient. I practiced hours and hours and hours, and I just loved it. But I never thought I'd make a living at it. I was still going to be an actress. But I went to that audition, I got hired, and all of a sudden, I never looked back. I have worked as an artist, as a juggling variety entertainer / mime, since that was in 1981. And not only did I got that job juggling, it was for a company called Chipwich Ice Cream Sandwiches. It was the strangest thing. So I ended up in this commercial world of activating products. So I was the juggling Chipwich girl in whiteface touring trade shows and going around the world with an expense account and staying in hotels and like, what am I doing here? But all my actor friends were starving and I'm flying around the world doing 5-minute little mime pieces, juggling pieces for products. And that lasted like 3 or 4 years. But I still wanted to create my own work. So I feel like the commercial side of me supported the artistic endeavors that I wanted to do. And, living in New York was very expensive. And I lived in the East Village. It was a fabulous time. There were a lot of artists there. There were a lot of variety entertainers there. And then, so I started a company called Mime Resources International, which is a very broad, crazy name, with a man named Everett Hogue and a juggler mime, Jocko McCain. And then the 3 of us wrote original work. And I would sort of siphon money from these other gigs into original work. And we did some beautiful original pieces for Artist and Hunger. We did that at Carnegie Hall. We were invited. We got to tour Japan. We worked at, I think Kennedy Center opened for Roberta Flack, like crazy, but they were original, beautiful mime, really, really classic mime pieces. So I kind of lived this split reality. And then I would do things like the Fragrance Foundation would call, and they have the Oscar Awards. And I got known as this person who could create work that had a beautiful artistic sense, but for commercial entities. So I put together like 10 mimes at Lincoln Center to open the Fragrance Foundation Oscar Awards for perfume. And there were mimes in beautiful costumes, and I designed and created this whole thing. I've been working for the US Open for 15 years, and I have 60 artists at the US Open in wild, insane, crazy tennis costumes, like with broken tennis in their heads, doing comedy, doing juggling, doing stilts, doing mime for the US Open. So I think, and I know that cartoon brain of mine came from James Donlin, because I remember early on, he would do scribbles on a piece of paper and then hand it to us and say, now create something from these scribbles. And I'll never forget that. And to this day, I make a living with that. Someone will call me and say, I need something about pink elephants. And I'll go, all right, let me sleep on it. So I started a company called Ms. Liz Events. But I really try to honor my artistic self. So knowing that, yes, it's a commercial venture and it will help support myself and my family, how can I make it really beautiful, really meaningful, and the production value really gorgeous? And in that too, I also get to work with some phenomenal variety entertainers. New York City is so rich. At the time in the early 80s when I moved there, it was like the new vaudeville was happening. So I became very involved in that, doing cabarets, doing street performing. I was a street performer at the South Street Seaport. I did fire juggling at the South Street Seaport. Then I became a face painter. There were stilt walkers and jugglers and circus artists. A really supportive family and a very unique time in Manhattan. I know I'm kind of rambling with the timing of this stuff, but I'm one of these people that I call myself sort of a jack of all trades and master of none in many ways. I have a very diverse skill set. But I also got very involved in working with clown doctoring. I think it was about 1982, around the same time, I went to the Big Apple Circus, which is the New York Circus. And I met Michael Christensen and some other Jeff Gordon, some incredible clowns who were doing hospital clowning. And so I auditioned and got hired. And I've been working with critically ill children in hospitals since 1982. And I have to say, of all the work I've ever done, it's obviously the deepest and sometimes the most difficult, but also the most joyous. But it goes back to that stillness. It goes to the empath in you. I think it really works on the improvisational side. And also you have the doctors, you have the patients, you have the parents, you have trauma. There's a lot of trauma very much involved in it. But it's so you have to learn to take care of yourself, but you also have to learn to break through whatever sadness is there and find the joy in that child. So even if that child has got tubes or bandages or whatever, there's still a little 5-year-old in there that just wants to laugh. And so I think it kept the purity of what I see as mime as being very present, having to really be sometimes extremely still, and then knowing how to really reach somebody's heart and cut through. I think it cuts through the essence of any art form. I think it's like, Jean said, we're actors, actresses, we're mimes, we're variety people, we're physical comedians. And I think in some ways and we'll talk about this later, there's a whole spiritual side that I believe in. And I think that we will speak to that. That kind of wraps it up. I've, just worked a lot of places. I've done hundreds of shows. I have a solo juggling show. I have and now, actually right now, which is really amazing, I finally am writing a new show. It's called The Flip Flop Circus with the woman named Therese Shorn, when we're doing a lot of puppetry. So now I'm kind of adding puppetry. Therese is a brilliant puppeteer. So the Flip Flop Circus started before the pandemic. And now we're deep in rehearsal. We're kind of using this creative time. And guess who's directing it? James Donlan just started helping us to direct the show. So I feel like this, and he's been giving virtual classes online, which I've been taking, which is marvelous. If he opens that up, you should all jump in. So I feel like I've gone back to my roots, and now I'm writing original material. And that's it. I feel very blessed. I've been a working artist my whole life, and mime is definitely the heart of it, the core, what started it for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz. My mind is kind of blown by everything everybody has said. I really wish I could just sit here and listen more, but I guess it's my turn to talk about my trajectory. But isn't it interesting how all roads lead back to James Donlan? All right, so like many of you, when I was a child, I wrote plays like Eugene, put my friends in my plays, told them which parts to be. I think my first inspiration, I mean, so I had a very creative spirit from very young age, but my first inspiration in as far as the world of mime was Charlie Chaplin. I remembered going to a movie theater and seeing a double feature of Modern Times and City Lights. And I think I laughed harder than I've ever laughed in my life. And it was incredible. And then I coaxed my mom to set up our old Super 8 film camera and those big bulky lights. In those days, we didn't have phones or even video cameras. It was all film and big bulky lights, and she set them up, and I created my own Charlie Chaplin show. Unfortunately, she had the shutter closed too tight, and most of it came out dark. But look, it was about the process of doing it, which is what I fell in love with. And so, but you know, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I did traditional theater all through school. I did quite a bit of community theater, where I played some wonderful roles. I got to play Peter Pan and Anne Frank in The Diary of Anne Frank, and, you know, kind of polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but joy and empathy. And that's what I loved about performing, is touching an audience, hearing the audience respond to something you're giving them that is real. And you feel the audience is sensing that they're watching something real on stage. I did see Marceau perform at the Grady Gamage Auditorium in Tempe, Arizona. And I did think he was marvelous, and it was incredible. It wasn't the moment that inspired me to study mime, but I will never forget that performance. I went to Oberlin College, which is a really great liberal arts college in the state of Ohio in the United States. And I was studying straight acting and a bunch of other things. And then there was a performance at the college by a brilliant mime artist named Keith Berger, and he performed there. A group of students were so moved by his performance that they got the college to bring Keith to the school and give a month-long intensive mime residency during the month of January, which is very cold there. And January at Oberlin is a time where the students work on one project. It's not, you don't take classes in lots of things, you just do one project. So I signed up for this mime workshop. A little dubious about mime, because I had seen, apart from Marceau, I'd seen some other mime and it really didn't grab me. But I thought, this sounds interesting, I'll sign up. And it was phenomenal. It was a month where Keith taught us the most incredible type of theater that I had ever experienced before. His schooling came from the American Mime Theater. So he used some American mime techniques and then sort of his own brand of how he had evolved as a mime artist. And he had been touring all around the country, mostly to colleges at that point. But I was just captivated by the idea that you could touch an audience through silence, through nonverbal communication, and that universality of it just moved me greatly. And it was the moment that we performed at the end of the month. We put on a show. Oh, and we also invented our own work. So it was really the first time that I was challenged to create my own work, to really dig deep and find out what was important to me as a human and write a story about it. And then at Keith's direction, turn it into a mime piece. And one of the pieces I came up with that month, this was in 1982, is still in my repertoire, and it's a piece that I teach to kids. It's evolved over the years. It's called Trees. It's a nature story about friendship and love, and I wrote a piece of music to go with it, and it's in my repertoire today, to this day, this thing that I created in 1982, which is just amazing to me. And as you can see by all our stories, those early educational experiences are sort of become the foundation of who we are. And, most of our stories are about those first experiences in school and having found a wonderful teacher, which I was so lucky to find in Keith at that time. And it was also a marvelous group of students. So I learned so much from my fellow students that month. By their inventiveness and their freedom, as Jean mentioned. There was so much freedom in the students. We were 18, 19, 20 years old, and we would just do anything. And so it just opened up my heart and the possibilities. I owe so much to that experience and to my fellow students. We formed the Oberlin Mime Players, which lasted for a few years during the time that most of us were at Oberlin. And I owe so much to that experience. So I graduated college and moved to New York, and Keith and I were starting to work on some material together. We also happened to be falling in love with each other. So the two things were just sort of completely intertwined. And I moved with him into his loft in Soho, New York, and we started playing around with some ideas, but we had a feeling that we had something special on stage, a certain chemistry that really, we kind of complemented each other. I think I was sort of, more of the empath in a way, and he had such brilliant skills as a mime. We really complimented each other, and his agent called and said, "Hey, Keith, they want you on a cruise crossing the Atlantic from Bermuda to Lisbon." He was still touring, and he had done a few cruises, and he said, "Well, only if I can bring my new partner." So his agent talked to the cruise people, and they said, "Okay, sure." And so we had 2 weeks to come up with a 20-minute set that we were going to perform on the cruise ship. And, if you're being hired, you want the material to be good. So we didn't just, we did slap it together, but we worked around the clock to make it really good. And we performed it on the cruise ship, and it was a hit. It was just amazing. The cruise wasn't amazing. We got seriously seasick for most of the time, because if you've never traveled across the Atlantic on a boat, don't. It's pretty horrendous. The Atlantic is a very choppy ocean. So we were both seriously seasick, but we had to perform. And so we did, and it was amazing. We were received really well, and we thought, we have something here. And so after we got back to New York, we continued working on material, did a few more cruises, which aren't really my favorite thing, but they get you sharp. They can really hone your skills, because you're dealing with so much weird, outside external events affecting you on a cruise ship. But we kept working, and then we toured colleges and theaters. And it was wonderful. And one of my, I guess, other moments of real important inspiration was going to the Edinburgh Theatre Festival, where we saw this incredible clown company from France called Mie de Pain, which means, I believe, the white of the bread. And they did a show called Séance Friction, which again, I believe is like the trouble of rehearsals, the friction in a rehearsal. And it was just the funniest thing. I think, after Charlie Chaplin as a kid, I think I laughed harder at this show. It was just incredible. But again, it reinforced the idea of putting laughter with pathos together in the same show, and taking an audience on a journey where they laugh, they cry, they do everything in between, and you do it with them. And that was just such a pivotal moment. But during this whole period of time, while we were in New York and touring, I was studying at the American Mime Theater. And Jean did a wonderful job of explaining the American Mime Theater and Paul Curtis. And I have to say, Paul Curtis was definitely one of the most powerful influences in my life, as well as working with Jean in the studio in class. But that was incredible. The American Mime Theater, I loved the discipline of that particular brand of mime, and Paul's teaching style. His style was not for everybody, but I loved the rigidity of it and the focus on, for lack of a better word, perfection. I mean, Paul was a great detector of bullshit. So if you were performing and you were phony, he would call you out on it. And that's what so many actors need, I think, because it's so easy to be phony as an actor. You learn tricks to seem like you're motivating your character, but you're really not. And so Paul was really great. And he also taught me so much about teaching. So I taught a little for him up at Cornell University, because he had an American Mime class up there. And then when we moved out west, I was teaching some American Mime classes out west at Paul's. Paul gave me his blessing to do that. And we would have these wonderful conversations about teaching American Mime, and I will forever be grateful for that time in my life. But so Keith and I, we were living in New York, we were touring, but this was late 80s. Mime was really ebbing. Mime has gone through, has been very popular at times and not popular at times. Mime was losing its popularity, and we kind of saw the writing on the wall. And when we were performing at the Edinburgh Theatre Festival, this was maybe 1988, 89, something like that, a woman came and talked to Keith and me after seeing our show. She really loved our work. And she said, the Los Angeles Music Center in LA, California, recently started an arts education program where they're sending professional artists to the schools to perform, mostly to perform, and a bit of teaching. And we thought, well, kids, we don't really perform for kids, sort of thinking that was, not really serious work. But we saw the writing on the wall that, touring was starting to ebb a little bit in the, college and adult market. So, and we also had just gotten married, and we knew we wanted kids, and both of us had grown up in the West. So we were ready to leave New York. So we auditioned for the Music Center. They really loved what we did, and it was just like a perfect fit for kids. We had to tailor a few things and choose correctly from our repertoire, but it was really a perfect fit. And so we relocated to LA. This was 1990, and that first year we were with the Music Center, we were booked solid doing the same show every single day, the whole school year. Honestly, at the end of the year, I was ready to slit my wrist because of the repetition, but it was a revelation. We thought, we have this market, this great market. We didn't have to worry about ticket sales and how many people were going to be showing up to the shows. We would just go to a school and have these wonderful children, enjoy our work. So we built other shows, we created other shows so that we wouldn't be doing the same show over and over again. And then we started teaching, and that at that time, arts education was really starting to become a legitimate field. So I started learning more of the pedagogy of teaching the arts in the schools and connecting to curriculum, which is really important for, there's a debate in the arts community about how much should be the arts, how much should be curriculum, but that's for another forum discussion. I think the arts should always be at the core. And if you can use your art to connect to their curriculum, that's great, but never lose the art as the fundamental thing you're putting out. So ever since then, we've been out here. We still tour from time to time, but we've been working in the schools mostly, performing, teaching, doing residencies, and we had children. So when our children were born in 1996 and 1999, this work was perfect for us because we could have a relatively normal life, doing a very abnormal thing for a living, certainly different than what most of our kids' friends' parents did for a living. But for me, that was very important. That, we could raise our kids comfortably and, without a lot of stress, and make a living. And I'm just so grateful to have found this niche for the two of us to be able to do the art that we love, to stay true to it, no compromising, but be able to have a family, to raise our kids. So that is pretty much my trajectory. And it might be an interesting segue into our next, let me see where we are in time, into our next area, which we've already touched on, so we could just kind of blend into it and just talk informally about this. But the subject of how challenging it is to be a woman as an artist, and in the US, and we all know the US doesn't support the arts like, as robustly as it does in other countries. So it's, it's very, very challenging. In my case, I wanted two things. When I was a young adult, I wanted a life in the theater and I wanted a family. And you have to make compromises if you want both. I grew up in the generation where, my mother's peers were all, feminists, and they raised their daughters to think you could have everything, you could do it all. And, I guess it depends on your perspective. Maybe you could say you could do it all, but you do have to make compromises. You have to make adjustments. And I certainly did that when I realized at the time we wanted to have kids, we were actually we had just gotten a new agent, and we were touring a lot, and our career could have gone, more in that direction where we'd be on the road and creating new material and having that life. But we really wanted kids. And when our kids were babies, we would bring them with us on the road, and it sounds really romantic, and some of it was great. But mostly I was stressed out. I didn't like having to keep track of our props, our costumes, the logistics, getting on the planes, getting the rental car, and having a baby and a toddler with us. It was just too stressful. So I really, and with Keith's blessing, made the decision that we really wanted to focus on our local work with the schools, because we could still perform, we could still do what we do, only raise our kids. So I feel like, I made certain adjustments, you could call them compromises as a woman, but for me, that was the right decision. Because I was really able to do both things, to have a life in the theater as a creative person and raise my kids. It hasn't always been easy, but those are some of the adjustments I've made. And I don't want to talk anymore because I want to hear other people weigh in about that subject. of compromises or just, you know, the particular challenges of being a woman in this really interesting art form. Would anybody like to say anything about that? I'm not going to pick. Please just speak.
I mean, I feel like I agree that there was a time in my life where I think I could have gone off on the road forever and been, you know, and doing creative work and touring theaters. And I really wanted to do more international work, but I also got married and had a child. That was around 1996. And I think that was, you know, very important to me. But I also remember I was performing in a tails coat with the sequins, trying to juggle when I was about 8 months pregnant in the Big Apple Circus. Like, so I felt like in some ways being a variety entertainer, it was good to be a woman because there were so few of us at that time. I actually was better off because if somebody wanted a female juggler, that was me. But mimes, when I used to go to auditions, let's say, even while my son was born, I lived near New York. So I would go to audition for a mime and there'd be 20 men there and 2 women. And a man would almost always get the job. A male mime would always get the job. Or a clown. I would get auditions for clowns. And honestly, for the commercial work for jugglers, and they almost 90% of the time picked a male. So it did get frustrating in that sense. So that's why I think I went a little bit into the corporate sector. I also went into schools. I started teaching schools and doing school performance. School performing was during those hours. I could still be with my son. I could take him to school, pick him up. You're home by noon. You're up at 5 a.m. You do a lot of driving, but I could work within the school systems as well. I could do original pieces. I wrote pieces based on curriculum. I wrote a show about the magic of energy based on renewable energy about 10 years ago, because that became something I felt was important that children learn young, but it was filled with mime and magic and circus arts. But we taught it to the kids in a fun, crazy, silly way. But it was educational, so I've done a lot of that arts work and made that same choice not to tour because of my son. I had to stay close by. I wanted to raise my son. So I agree with some of those choices that women have to make that maybe men, some men probably do stay home as well, probably more now, but at that time, because I was also producing, writing, directing, casting, making dinner, shopping for groceries, changing the diapers. I mean, women do all of it. I was raised in that generation too, that you can do everything. Mm-hmm. And then at one point I got a divorce. So now I'm a single mother trying to do all of it. So I think I did have to make financial choices, especially in America, because the government doesn't support our work. We had to be I felt like I constantly had to generate work. I would always try to hire other women and collaborate with other women to support them. And I felt really good about that. And there was only one time in the circus where I remember I'm not going to say who, the quote was, "Oh, well," because I kept saying, why aren't there more women clowns in the circus, in the main ring, All of us were around. And "Oh, well, women aren't funny." I was like,
that in the stand-up comedy world too, that women
that killed me. And it just wasn't true. Some of the funniest women I know people I know are women. So that did exist in my world. I heard that too many times. So,
Joan, do you have anything to add to this portion of our conversation regarding women in mime, women in theater, and any obstacles?
Don't get me started.
Okay.
Well, sure. Partly because I went into this, in the late 60s, and things were quite different then. And in some ways, they're still the same. And I would say that my personal bent was to not have a family. And it was actually my male partners who got married and had families, which made them want to tour less. Because I was very much into international touring, which our company did a lot of in the 80s and early 90s. And I was very disappointed. And at that point, I created a solo show so that I could still tour. But you know, the little bits of sexism that have colored all of our lives are everything from women clowns aren't funny. That was something that was a kind of given in the patriarchal world of, you know, the Italian mime man who started dell'arte. And that took many years to change. Someone came to teach commedia at our school, who shall not be named, and who was surprised that he said, well, women aren't in commedia. And I have written about this in the sort of anthology of commedia dell'arte writings. I wrote about women in this, or going to visit an Italian, sorry, my phone is messaging me. It's either me and the phone or none of us. So this Italian director teaching a commedia workshop, which was, his class was maybe 9 women and 1 man, and going out for him with coffee afterwards, I'm having him say to me, well, you know, there's all these women in the class. Commedia is not a woman's form. And so to hear these so casually said things has been part of my life. Finding myself not listed among women artistic directors of companies in America, I think that's partly also a prejudice against ensembles, as well as prejudice against women. It's very difficult for ensembles to be taken seriously in a similar way. And in the world of mime, you know, now my organization is dealing very much with the ideas of whiteness, white supremacy culture, white privilege. Why are there almost no people of color in the world of mime in the USA? And why are the Black American mime artists working in Baptist churches instead of in the mainstream? And as Marco said earlier, the world is open to us all. No one's saying you can't be part of this, but at the same time, how have the doors been opened, or have they? So I will say that my organization, dell'arte, at the moment is dealing with things that I thought, okay, maybe these were simply patriarchal values, but in fact, they have to do with white supremacy. It's trying to see the world now through a different lens, because I have looked for a long time at the world through a feminist lens, through trying to be aware of things like classism within our work, and with sexism, of course. But this is, I'm late to the party about how equity, diversity, and inclusion affect our world. And I think mime has suffered from an identity problem for a long time anyway. You know, if you Google mime images, you will get nothing but striped t-shirts and white faces. And so I remember Paul Curtis saying at one of the International Mime and Pantomimes meetings, board meetings that we had, the reason mime has not succeeded as an art form in itself is because we never developed a body of critical theory. He said modern dance would not have taken off if it hadn't been for the critics who were willing to write about it, discuss it, analyze it, argue about it. And I think in the world of mime, as Paul said, that hasn't really happened. Plenty of arguments. The crew, look, so don't go to them. But those are internal arguments. They're not something the public is even interested in. So I would say it's been a long road through all of those twists and turns that have to do with things that affect our life and our profession. I will say, last thing I'll say is that when I agreed to go to work for dell'arte, there was a kind of breakup within the company. The couple that started it split up. And I was left at that time with another mime who was then my lover. and Carlo. And I said, you know, we will take this on, no money, no nothing, and work for nothing and put it on its feet if we have the power to do something. So we became our own board of directors. And I said, this is going to be about us making a living. It's not going to be about us just doing what we want to do for the love. It's about doing it and making a living. And I hear that in some of the others of you about that you want it to be a life that supports you or a life that allows you to have a family. And I think that that happened, that we have made that happen, those of us who have made it happen. And it's an important thing to notice and to recognize that it is, every artist has to be able to manage their talent. Otherwise so in this world, that includes how do you support yourself? How do you put groceries on the table and still do it? And I think, Sharon, you said there's compromises all along the way, different ones for different people. But I love hearing about how all of you have made your way through this life.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. This might be a good time to segue. We just have a few more minutes, but given that it's a difficult road for everybody, you know, not women or, you know, certain subgroups, it's a difficult road to be an artist in the US and to make a living and to do it the right way. For young people coming up right now, and I have two children who are immensely talented. They're 24 years old and 21 years old. And, you know, they're in the arts. They're our kids, and they grew up performing with us and loving the arts, music and theater, mime. And, you know, we're always trying to advise them, whether they ask or not. What would you say to young people coming up in this world, in the current climate, our political climate, our economic, certainly this year with the pandemic, and it's just going to be harder and harder to find work? What would all of you say to a young person who wants a life in the arts, who, as Jean said, who wants a creative life? What would you tell them?
I think young people are experiencing probably the least amount of economic support, at least this generation coming up and the previous generation, as compared to the rest of us, due to the cost of living, due to the high cost of higher education, and due to low arts funding, which just seems to keep getting less and less. But most of my students are in their 20s and 30s. And so, I even have several students in their early 20s. And what I found is that they're very dissatisfied with the world that they've been, which I think is a great strength because they're quite determined to change it. And I think this is, and to speak to Joan's comments about white supremacy and mime, I think white supremacy in the arts, period, has been sort of the rule, you know, and we see it in large museum organizations like the MoMA, or, you know, it's pervasive in all of the arts. And I think it's this younger generation that has really forced us to see that. So it's an interesting thing because I feel like we can give them advice, but I feel like I've been taking more advice from them than I've actually been giving. I mean, other than teaching them the craft, right? The skills, the techniques, the art. But so many of the assumptions that I've made about how you get to be a professional artist are all shifting and changing now in so many different ways that I almost feel like I don't know what the world's going to look like for them. I don't know, maybe that just doesn't sound like specific enough, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I totally agree with you. I'm learning more from my children than I'm teaching them at this point. You know, and their peer group, for sure. I mean, they're dealing with things that we didn't have to think about, or we didn't think about, I should say. And they're much more enlightened. I mean, I would say, I think the only thing a suggestion I would offer a young person, if you want a life in the arts, in the creative arts, be organized, because without being organized, you know, Joan's saying, you know, we realized we needed to run our company ourselves and survive. You have to feel, Marguerite Matthews last week was saying she learned how to write grants and to be an administrator. I know, Jean, you probably fall into this as well. To keep a company going, you have to be organized. And that is what is probably the biggest lack as a young person. I was not very organized when I was 20. My husband wasn't very organized when he was 20. Some people are, but a lot aren't. But, you know, find a really good teacher who can really inspire you and, you know, open up your heart to the art that you're being attracted to. Give it your all, but be organized. So that's my little sage word that I would add to it. Yeah, Joan.
Just one other thing to say about that. We now in our MFA program teach a course, when we have the program, called Artist Entrepreneur, because it is necessary to understand websites now. It's necessary to understand how you are visible to people. But the other thing I want to say is about community engagement. This is an almost new, it's not a new field. There have been people working this field for years, but it has become a place for entry-level work that people can be paid for. And I will say that in my snobby early years, I dismissed that in the same way that you, Sharon, talked about dismissing working with children. And as we get older, we realize that that is where, if the life of the arts are to continue, they have to start there. And the idea of being in a community, a local community, working there, I think now, because you said none of us knows what's going to happen when this pandemic is over. Will any of the arts as we know them exist in the same way? But communities still need us. We still need them. And to make a stand within a smaller world, to me, is a very, very viable way to keep your creative spirit alive, and to look at what can I do for this community? How can they come to need what I do? So I think that's a possibility for people, young people, to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
And I agree, because I've sort of got into this position of hiring a lot of artists. There's the old adage, like, you just have to show up. You know, there's this thing about artists not being, you have to be driven, you have to be disciplined. And I think that comes from training. I believe that it's really important to get really good training. But I think what's lacking is also any kind of business training, because all of us know marketing is 60%. And I think that easily, I mean, you could have great marketing and, you could be a great talent, but never be seen, ever, never found, never do anything. So I agree that you throw yourself into the community. I used to just go, if there was a woman's shelter, I'd go do a show. If there was a library, I used to go volunteer. I'll do the show for free, and then I'd meet somebody or meet people. I did a lot of work around, when I left New York City and moved to Connecticut, I just did work to find people. It helped the community. It helped me continue to have to create stuff. It made connections. And I think that this young generation, they're much more savvy than we are as far as computer skills. And I think they're going to be magnificent marketers. I think, like, I recently worked for the New Victory Theater. I do teaching there, and I'm working with all these 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and I'm the old woman in the room. And, they run circles around marketing and all that, those skills. So they have those skills. But the main thing is that, we have to keep this art alive. It's so important. I think that's why us all talking to each other, just to be in the room with all of you, to feel like the history that's here and having other women talk about it, I would just say to them, jump in, study, keep the art alive, because the world needs joy.
Yes.
The world needs joy right now. It needs to be uplifted. And our art form does that. And I worked in a lot of underprivileged communities and they're not exposed to it. There's no art in the schools anymore. There's no art being given in American cities. It's really dwindling. I mean, there is some. Sharon's doing it. There's some, but there's not enough.
There's not enough for sure. And the low income schools have to, they have to rely on a really motivated teacher to write grants to get the money to have you come to their schools. Whereas the wealthy schools, the parents just give their annual donations and poof, you can have this robust
supremacist world here that we're living in.
Yeah, the inequity is just staggering. I would love, Jean, would you like to weigh in on this subject about young people coming into the field of mime, or just?
I come from a different, I've never made any money in the arts. And the thing is, the arts, people are always saying, the theater is going to be dead, it's going to die. As long as there are people who want to do it, it will stay alive. And it would be the same with mime or painting. As long as there are people who are always seeking a form of self-expression, then it will be alive. If you have that passion and that need, why are we teaching people to only make a living? Now, there's so many ways you can make in the arts a living, and all of these ideas are good. But if you really are looking to be an artist, then you're always working on your art, and you get up in the morning and you say, what can I do today that will make me a little better as an artist than yesterday? Always. If someone happens to like it and you can make, fine. But it will always be there for you. It's like, it's a passion. If it isn't that important to you, job that will make you a living. You have to want it so much that you will find the route and the way that you will be able to communicate your art. And if you're lucky, you may make a living. And I certainly agree that an artist today has to learn the techniques to do that, to promote themselves. But first, get good training, get a good teacher, train yourself well. Some people say, well, maybe you're not very good. Maybe you need to build your skills. If you don't know yourself, if you're good at this and not so good at this, how do I get better at that? Doesn't matter. And that's one of the things that we lack in the mime business, is the good teachers. So anybody who's teaching, you should do it. You should help people find that way, because there are very few. And when you talk about Paul, it's very important to be believable. And the kind of teacher that you want is one that will tell you whether that is true or not. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels.
Well said, Jean. Well, I think we are coming to the end of our time. I see Marco's popped up. Is it time for us to go home now, Marco? Can we play?
Well, to be honest, I can listen to you all night long. It's evening here already. So if you wish to continue, please do. Or we can schedule another meeting in another chat in a week or so. It has been so inspiring and emotional and just wonderful to listen to and to watch you ladies. Thank you so much.
I really want to thank everybody for joining us. Liz jumped in at the last minute, which was so great. Thank you, Liz. But
it's just my pleasure, my honor. Thank you.
Thank you. No, my honor. And hopefully we can keep the conversation going in some way or another. And I hope to be visiting all of you very soon
in person.
in person.
Not
Yes.
digitally.
So I'll turn it over to you now, Marco.
I have a small announcement. For the past 2 years, we organized 2 World Mime conferences with the idea of having mimes talk to each other. And the third one should have been in a month in Shanghai. They wanted to host it, which is wonderful. But it is going to be online from the 10th to the 13th of December. And it's free, so anybody can register. There are links on our pages on Facebook, and there will be one on our website tomorrow. But during the last one, that was in 2019, we have established 2 awards at the World Mime Organization. They're very simple, nothing rich, just a way to remember certain people and or institutions and to say thank you. It seems that it became rather rare today that people say thank you, especially to those who were there before them. The world didn't start with the birth of another person. It started long time ago. So last year we decided we have 2 awards. One is for personalities, and the other one is for institutions. And this one for institutions is called the Special World Mime Organization Award for the outstanding contribution to the art of mime. And we were hoping to surprise Jean and her colleagues at the American Mime Theater. Oh, it's white, so you can't see it now. Let me switch off this background. Okay, like this. So here it is. It's to the American Mime Theater.
Oh my.
Hey, congratulations.
And it is almost 70 years that you have been there, and this is one thing that is mountable on the wall. So we were hoping to surprise you in New York to come and to give you a wall, but it was not possible. So hopefully...
She's an actress. She can pretend to be surprised.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And
I am surprised. I don't have to pretend. I am surprised, and I'm very thankful for that award. Absolutely.
As I said, it's not the Oscars,
Absolutely.
but
Thank you so much.
It's just a way to say thank you for all the work of you and your colleagues and colleagues before you, of your institution and everything that you have done, not only in the United States, but worldwide. Thank you.
For all these years. We're in our 68th anniversary of a company and the school training the professional performer. 68 years. Yeah. So thank you so much for that recognition.
Thank you. Thank you, really. And ladies, thank you really so much for this wonderful chat. And Sharon, thanks for organizing it with all your team. And thanks, James, for putting all of us together and bringing us all of us together. And so we know each other now. And if we travel, and hopefully that is going to happen soon, if you come to Serbia, you know that you will have who you can call and have a coffee with, or the same thing is that's the whole point of the World Mime Organization. We're trying to make it as a family. So even if we don't work together, we know that wherever we go, we have somebody to call and have a nice drink with. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And if any of you get to Blue Lake, coffee on me.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll see you.
So we will end this chat. We will end the broadcast on Facebook. So bye-bye, everybody. See you soon.
Bye.
and stop the recording and stop.